Hi guys, Kelly here, and I wanted to share with you my TBR for the Rereadathon hosted by Merphy Napier. I will link her announcement video down below because in addition to her being the main host of the week, this is from March 10th through 16th, there are also different hosts every day that are bloggers, Instagrammers, and other YouTubers that are co-hosting each day. So she has a ton of hosts, so if you're looking for other people to follow, she has a whole Google Doc of all of the hosts, so I will link her announcement video down below. And basically the point of this readathon is to just reread books that you have liked in the past or whatever. And there are 7 prompts, and since I am trying to read a book a day in March, I am picking 7 books. And actually I have more than 7 books here because some of them I'm choosing between 2 books because, you know, I'm a mood reader, so I didn't want to like give myself only 7 books to read. So a couple of these I have options, and in the month of March I've been reading mostly middle grade, but I want to take a little break from that this week so that I can read some adult books. So only not even half of these are actually middle grade books. There's several adult or young adult, so that I can kind of get into some more adult content, which sounds weird, but you know what I mean, just some more adult themes, stuff like that. And anyway, so let's get to it. So the first prompt is a book you're going to give a second chance. And I'm going to read Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. I had read this book way long ago, probably around the time that the movie came out. And so that would have been maybe early 2000s. So it was a long time ago, and I didn't really love it. But I also don't really remember much about the book versus the movie. And I think part of that was at the time I was not a middle grade reader, and I also wasn't really a fantasy reader, and so I want to read this now that I really do love Gail Carson Levine. I've been reading a lot of her books lately and loving them, and I really do love middle grade fantasy at this point, and so I just feel like I read this in the wrong time of my life, so I want to give it a second chance. The next one is read an old favorite, and this is when I am choosing between 2 books. These are both books. I had done a video back at the beginning of my channel where I wanted to read books that I read over 10 years ago that were my favorites and see if I like them now, and I still have like several of those books left to do. So the 2 that I'm choosing from for this are from that list. I'm hoping to redo that video, like give the results before it's been a year since I put that video up. And so I'm choosing between The Death and Life of Charlie St. Cloud by Ben Sherwood, which is just kind of like a romancy with a little bit of fantastical element to it. This also was a movie, so you might have heard of the movie Charlie St. Cloud with Zac Efron. So it became popular after it was a book, but I had read it before the movie came out. And then I'm choosing between this or Angels and Demons by Dan Brown, which is the first book in his, like, what is it, Robert Langdon or whatever series. And I had read both of these books over 10 years ago, so I remember loving them, but I don't really remember much specifics about them, so I'm going to choose between those, whether I'm in the mood for romance or whether I'm in the mood for a little more like mystery kind of thing. And then the next one is a recent favorite. I actually think those were out of order, but yeah, so a recent favorite, I'm going to read The Start of Me and You by Emery Lord, and this is a book I read last year, and it was on my favorites of 2018, but I read this book so quickly. I read it like in a day. It was like a YA contemporary romance kind of book, but I remember it having a really great friendship group, and that's what I really loved about it. But other than that, I don't really remember much about the book because I read it so fast and just like devoured it in like a couple sittings. So I want to like give it another read and make sure that I still love it, or if it was just like it hit me at the right time or what. So I want to try that one out again so I can actually remember the plot of the book. And the next one is a game-changing book. So that would be like, for me, I'm picking it as a book that kind of changed what genres I was interested in. So for this, I'm going to choose between Princess Academy by Shannon Hale or Harry Potter. And the reason is that, like I said, I used to not be a middle grade fantasy reader, but then what changed that was I picked up some of Shannon Hale's books. Somebody had recommended them to me, and I picked them up, and I just like fell in love with all of her middle grade fantasy books, and reading those were what made me pick up Harry Potter, because at the time when I was reading these books and like saying, oh, maybe I do love middle grade fantasy, we were already at like book 5 was out of Harry Potter, and I kept telling everybody, no, I don't want to read it, I don't like middle grade books, I don't like fantasy books. This was like in my 20s, And so I had no attention to picking up Harry Potter until I read this. So I feel like that's a game changer because now Harry Potter is one of my favorite series. So I'm going to choose, maybe I'll read them both because they kind of have a special place in my heart of that, like, being in my 20s and deciding that I really do enjoy middle grade fantasy. And so the next one is an underrated or unpopular book. And for this one, I'm also choosing between two books. I have The Sugar Queen by Sarah Addison Allen. And this is, I don't actually remember what this book was about, but Sarah Addison Allen writes books that have a little bit of fantastical elements, so it's almost like a magical realism kind of bit, and they're really charming Southern kind of romance books, and I just don't remember this one. I've read everything by this author, I've enjoyed it all, I just don't remember the plot of this book specifically, and the only reason I'm calling this an unpopular book is because I never hear anybody talking about it. It does have really good reviews on Goodreads, so there are people that are enjoying her books. It just seems like not on BookTube, like I never hear anybody talking about it. And then the other one is Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire. He's the one that wrote Wicked. And this one does get fairly bad reviews on Goodreads, but I remember liking it when I read it like over 10 years ago. I actually had started this book already. I'm like 1/4 of the way through and it was really dragging for me, so I took a break from it. But I would like to read one of these, so it's just whether I can like get myself to finish this book because I was having some trouble with it, or if I want just a cutesy romance. So I'll be choosing between those two. The next one is a childhood favorite, and for that I'm going to read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. I adored this book when I was in like, you know, like the pre-teen time, because this book, when I first read it, I was like, this is what's going to happen to me, because, you know, it's all about buying your first bra and your first period and all that like kind of stuff that girls will go through, but nobody ever talks about really. So I just remember being a kid and being like, this is going to teach me the mysteries of being a woman or something like that. And I remember reading this book over and over again before like puberty hit. Like, just read it, I would probably say 10 times. But obviously, once I actually became a teenager, I stopped reading it, and I haven't read it since I was a kid, so I don't know if this is like objectively a good book, and I want to know if it's something I should let my girls read when they also get to like that upper elementary age. So I want to reread it as a childhood favorite. And then the last one is a popular book, and this might be stretching it a bit, but I'm going to read Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And the reason I think it's stretching a little bit because it's not currently a super popular book because it was written 30 years ago. I mean, it was written in 1990, but the Jurassic Park franchise is very popular. I mean, the fact that like there were three or four movies back then? I think 3 movies back in the 90s, and they have redone and do 2 new Jurassic Park movies now, shows that it is a popular franchise, so I'm going to count that as a popular book. But the reason I picked this is that I read this book when I was a kid. Like, I think I read this book when I was in 5th or 6th grade, which is kind of crazy because it's obviously like an adult horror kind of book. I mean, sci-fi horror because the dinosaurs are scary. But I was one of those kids that just read everything I could get my hands on, and my dad had the audio cassettes. Like, that shows how like old I am. Like, so he had the audiobook on cassettes, and I listened to them on the bus on the way to and from school because I lived in the middle of nowhere, and it took like an hour on the bus to get to school, and I had my little Walkman, and I listened to Jurassic Park. And I remember loving it. Like, I have a horrible memory, but I distinctly remember scenes from this book that are not in the movie, so they definitely are from the book. And just probably because it scared me as a kid, but also just loved it. And I loved the movies, and so, like, the old movies. So I'm just very excited to give it a read now that I'm an adult and really of the age that should be reading it. And hopefully we'll enjoy it just as much as I did when I was a 5th and 6th grader. And that is it. Those are the books that I'm thinking of reading. If you are participating in the Rereadathon, I'd love to hear what you're interested in reading and like what you think about rereading in general. I personally love it because I forget a lot of the books, and so I enjoy like reliving them. But I also have that like hesitancy of if a book was my favorite, like especially Are You There, God? Me, Margaret, I have such wonderful memories of this book, but I feel like, oh, I'm gonna ruin it by reading it as an adult. So do you have those feelings too when you reread things? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. All right, bye.